we wanted on this first session to offer some input, some perspective. And Maya is going to be my wonderful presentation host, and I'll be talking to you. We wanted to really speak a little bit about the paradigm or the worldview, and I'm going to define that in a moment, on which the art of participatory leadership or the art of hosting is founded on. And you can either call it living systems. I'm very inspired by Fritjof Capra, and I'll speak to him a little bit more towards the end. The systems view on life, seeing life as an interconnected system, is very much at the heart. If you want to go forward there, Maya. So I wanted to start off and just define this word worldview or paradigm. A group of people, a community, can have a constellation of concepts or values or perceptions and practices that together forms a particular view or vision of reality. And that is what this particular vision or view is, how the community organizes itself, or how the community views life. And that's what a worldview is. For many of us, at certain points in life, we might think that there's only one worldview and it's never changing. And events, especially crises, happen so that we can actually shift our views. And so when the entire conceptual framework of a worldview radically begins to change, there's a revolutionary break, we have a worldview shift taking place. Okay, and we are certainly in that kind of a time. If you want to move forward, Maya. And it's Fritjof Capra that speaks this, but I totally believe in it, is that we are really living a crisis of perception. For a very, very long time, and since a wonderful Frenchman called Descartes, we have been living a very outdated worldview, which is totally inadequate for dealing for our very populated world and very interconnected world. And this outdated worldview is very much based on seeing the universe and life as if it's a machine composed of elementary building blocks. That you can look at something, you can look at a problem, you can dissect it, break it down, and then zoom into the parts, do something to the parts, and it's going to work. That's not how life is organized. So this machine kind of way of looking at the world has created our organizations, has created many systems, our education systems, our health systems, et cetera, as being something that looks like a machine and not a living system. So now we're right in this very fundamental change in the worldview, in science and in society. And that's really important because in our modern world, science has become a very, very important element. And we don't have time tonight, but there's a lot of sciences, whether it's chaos theory, complexity theory, quantum physics, etc., that has started to show us that we have a very, very different way of perceiving life. And it's so radical. So here's our web. So we're having a whole new understanding of how life is actually organized and how we as humans need to live. And I think the spider's web is a great one because it's all about interconnection. It's all about being part of a wider web of life. And as humans, not being the ones at the top of the chain, not being the ones that direct everything, we're just interconnected with the rest of life. So moving on. And what we see here with our root is that very important in a systems view of life is actually looking life, the organization structure of life, as a network with inseparable patterns and relationships and contexts. So when you start to work with the art of hosting, you start to really work with this way of perceiving things through those interconnected patterns of relationships and contexts. You don't look to break things down, you look to make things whole. You look to see what connects them, not what breaks them down. And so what this view of life is showing us is that our planet is a whole. It's a living, self-regulating system itself. We're also seeing, do you want to move forward? That our human body, it's not just the brain, but also the immune system, the bodily tissues, and even our cells are living cognitive systems. That means they are aware, they're able to be aware. There's cognition in the way that our body works. And of course, it's all interconnected, even though we have heart doctors and we have kidney doctors and whatever. And evolution, we're seeing that evolution is not a competitive struggle, as we thought Darwin was telling us, but it's actually a cooperative dance in which creativity and the constant emergence of novelty are the driving forces. Key word there, and that we'll be working with, is the word emergence. So this thing that we're talking about, art of hosting, it's all around collaboration and participation. And that is how we enter into the cooperative dance. You're fine. So the system view of life invites us to think in terms of, firstly, relationships. We just felt it in our circle. Okay, the way we checked in was us beginning to come into relationship. And the feeling that some of us spoke to in the circle of, oh, I feel peace, I feel comfortable, I feel like I'm arriving, etc. It's because we're working with the invitation of us to relate to one another, right? We're not here to show something to one another. We're here to begin to connect. The other element of a systems view of life is to look for patterns. It's not to dissect, but it's to look at what connects and what emerges from that connection in terms of patterns. What Mira and what our Julia did is, through the harvest, they gave us a pattern. They offered us patterns. One was spoken words and the other was visual, right? So they were working at the pattern level. Third element that a systems view of life invites us into thinking is context. It is very important when you work with this practice, which is based on this way of seeing life, is to read context, to understand context. Culture is context. That's one element of it. An organization, as you walk into an organization, it has its context. Understanding context is the way that you can start to understand what is actually happening somewhere. A lot of times we break our relationships, or we break our ability to connect because we haven't understood the context. We haven't arrived into the context. Right now, we're creating a common context for our learning, and we'll be doing more of that in the next session. The other element is a systems view is totally based on wholeness, on the systemic, on that interconnectivity, and not looking at parts, but looking for the whole, which of course is also connected to patterns. Networks, that is the main organizing structure of a systems view. Not our bureaucracies, not our hierarchies, it's the networks. Okay, so, and then the perspective is around form and not matter. I have to throw in a Greek philosopher, right? Because I'm Greek. From Aristotelian and onwards, there was a lot of difference between form, which is the pattern, versus matter, which is the mechanistic. And so this is very much a form, a perspective of form and not matter. It's not what you make, it's not the ingredients that make up something, it's what it is. It's not the breaking down of things. Let's go on then. So art of hosting, meaning from conversations. These are the assumptions on which the art of hosting is based. I'm one of the co-initiators of the art of hosting, and back in the early 2000s, when we met in spaces like here, we started to realize and see, that's over 20 years ago, we started to see that we're in a time of fundamental change. And we keep thinking we've reached the moment of fundamental change, and more happens. So we're just in a new spiral of that fundamental change, but It needs to happen because we have unsustainable ways of living, and we're going towards our death if we don't shift that. We need to learn these new perceptions of life. We need to be able to really come into a new mindset. And I think it was our good man from Tunisia, you used that word, to see new mindsets. We really need to perceive life differently. Go ahead. Some more. Where does this newness comes from? It comes in the space between chaos. Chaos does not mean out of control. Chaos actually means movement. It means something that has random movement and no pattern to it. And then there's order when a pattern emerges. So the other way that I see chaos and order is between what we don't know and what we know. How do you stay in that space? We're going to talk much more about that. We're going to offer you practices that allow us to live in that space. Meaningful conversations is actually one of the fundamental human ways in which we learn to be in the chaotic space, and which we can steady ourselves, especially when the chaos the movement is so fast. We need each other to be in these meaningful conversations. I come from a refugee family, and I remember speaking to my grandfather and asking him about what happened when they lost their lands and their communities. And he said, we used to sit and talk until we found a new way forward. That's the power of meaningful conversations, and it leads to wise actions. It's not just talking. It's from the center of these conversations emerges possibility. And finally, and somebody spoke it, paradox is always there. It always exists. The opposites and the tension of the opposite of paradox is actually part of the creativity in which some of this emergence and some of it's the part of the creativity that we need for life to happen, right? But we are certainly in a time of huge tension, and Turtle Island, North America right now, the United States of America, is feeling that tension. And it can be violent, but it's feeling that tension so that something else is coming through. And we're really living that time. I'm going to stop there. I hope this is just a starter, something that offers you some perspective.